I knew nothing about poverty, and yet I had this large organization of people depending on me. And I remember saying, Lord, I don't know what to do. It took all my courage to show up today. I literally don't know what to do next. It was almost like the Lord said to me, that's exactly where I want you. I want you helpless and dependent upon me. Just sit back and watch, be faithful, and see what I do.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hales, editor of Premier Christianity magazine. That's the UK's leading Christian magazine, and it sponsors this show. Here on The Profile, we always like to hear from a guest about their personal life story and also their ministry. We delve deep into people's lives to hear about what God has been doing through them. I'm delighted to say that my guest on the show today is Richard Stearns. Richard is President Emeritus of World Vision USA, and he's also the author of the new book, Lead Like It Matters to God. Richard, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Sam. Great to be with you.
So tell me a little bit about your early life growing up. Were you raised in a Christian family?
Actually, I was not. I was raised in kind of a challenging home. My parents were divorced when I was about 10, and my father was an alcoholic with an 8th grade education. My mother never finished high school, and so it was a little shaky at the beginning. We were not a Christian home, and but I saw, even as a youngster, I saw education as probably my path out of that situation, and was fortunate to be able to go to 2 great universities and get an education and get my life started in a better direction.
So tell me a bit about where Christian faith came into the picture for you. If it wasn't a Christian influence from your family, what was your first encounter with Christianity?
Well, I went off to Cornell University when I was 18, and that's one of the 8 Ivy League colleges here in the U.S. And Ivy League colleges have a way of turning you into an atheist. And so by the time I was a senior at Cornell, I was a pretty well confirmed atheist. I had a major in neurobiology. But my senior year, toward the end of the year, I was fixed up on a blind date with a young woman who is now my wife of 46 years. And she was a Christian. And to make a long story short, we had a kind of a deep conversation that first date. And over the next year or so, as our relationship kind of grew, this faith issue became a big barrier between us. And so I set out to do quite a bit of investigation. I was a scientist, right? And so I think I read 40 or 50 books on theology and comparative religion and apologetics. And after that, I was I'd gone off to the Wharton School of Business, and I was getting my MBA. And, one day after reading book number 50 or something like that, I realized that I now had crossed over from unbelief to belief. And, I prayed one of those prayers, Lord, not sure what I'm doing here, but I want to live my life for you. I want to go where you send me, be what you want me to be. And I'm yours. So I'm all in. And so that was kind of my conversion experience. And I guess I'd say I never looked back. I just had a lot of confidence going forward. So I jumped into my business career and went forward.
Yeah. It's interesting that it sounds like your conversion was very much based on intellect and reading solid arguments that stacked up for you. I think sometimes a lot of people assume that the atheists have all the good arguments, but of course there's not much truth in that, is there?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was very much a rational man. I was always moved by logic, and I kind of reasoned, if this is not true, why do people go to church? Why bother with all of this if it's not true? But if it is true, it changes everything, right? It changes the entire meaning of our lives. It changes everything about the way we see the world. And so once I determined that I believed that the story was true, that Jesus really was divine and sent by God, it it just rocked my worldview. And, I made that determination that everything I do and everything I think has to now be informed by this amazing truth. And that's kind of how I tried to live my life since then.
What did your parents think when you told them you'd become a Christian?
They were nominally Roman Catholic, but they because of the divorces, they had been excommunicated, so they never darkened the door of a church. But they were fine. They thought it was kind of curious. What's all this religious stuff that our son is into? I think at one point they thought I might have been in a cult or something. But they came to terms with it, and I think they saw the change in my life, and I think they were proud of me in the end. And
yeah, they thought it was a phase you might grow out of, but you never grew out of it.
Right.
So tell me what came next after university.
Yeah. So Renee, my girlfriend then and wife today, we were married shortly after graduation, moved to Boston, and I started my career in business with an entry-level job at the Gillette company, shaving razors and deodorants and things like that. She went on to law school and got her law degree at Boston College, and we kind of started our family, and we ended up having 5 children. People say, why on earth did you have 5 children? And I always say, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was, but anyways, they're all grown up now, and we wouldn't give any of them back. So, so I had about a 23-year business career. We got very involved with our local church. And, as I like to say, we could have been the poster children for the successful Christian life, both of us, kind of prosperous, a great family, 5 kids and a dog named Snickers, a nice home in the suburbs. And then, God kind of rocked my life because right in the middle of my career, I was the CEO of a company called Lennox China, which is the Wedgwood of the United States, if you will. And I got a call from an executive recruiter who said that World Vision, this Christian NGO, was looking for a new president. And, it's an interesting story because my first reaction was, I am totally unqualified to be the president of World Vision. I know nothing about poverty. I've never been to the developing world. I have no theological degree. I have no fundraising background. And so I tried to very quickly disabuse the recruiter of any notion that I could be a candidate for this job. And I thought he would see that clearly. But as God would have it, the recruiter asked me this penetrating question, Sam, are you willing to be open to God's will for your life? And, on the surface, that seems like an easy question. Sure, I'm open to God's will. That's, of course I am. But I said, I'm pretty sure this is not it, and, but that got me thinking that, well, what if God really was trying to send me a message and call me to this job? And so it led to a kind of a long, several month period of, soul searching. And, I tentatively agreed to be a candidate for the job, fully believing they'd never hire me, because the board of directors would come to their senses and hire somebody with more experience. And when the interview process was complete, they had chosen me. And I was shocked and surprised and a bit panicked because it meant I had to quit my job, sell my house, move my family, take a huge pay cut. And so it was really quite a dramatic turn in our lives. But again, I went back to that first commitment to God, like, I'll go where you send me, I'll do what you call me to do. And, but when that becomes real, I call it my rich young ruler moment, where you recall the story of the rich young ruler. And the Lord said, you lack one thing: sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come and follow me, and then you'll have treasure in heaven. And he was metaphorically asking me to sell everything I had and give it to the poor and follow him. And so my wife and I decided to do it. I was kind of grudgingly obedient to this. I wasn't joyful or excited. But we did make the change, and the next 20 years I spent at World Vision were the richest years of my life. And just a wonderful blessing to my wife and I and our kids and our family.
How did you know that it was God calling you rather than just, well, it's an interesting job opportunity? But how did you know, no, God is actually in this and this is something that he wants me to do?
It's always hard to know God's will for your life. You have to try to discern these things. But I think for me, it was just a series of so many unusual coincidences, that together, you clearly saw the fingerprints of God in this thing. And partly no other way to explain it, because as I said, I had no qualifications for this job that I could see. And yet the board of directors, which were, a group of 17 or 18 people that were very capable people, very dedicated Christians, they interviewed me and a bunch of other candidates, and they said, this is the guy we feel is being called to this job. And so they took an enormous risk. But, there were signs along the way. I had a friend who worked at World Vision, and we'd been friends since before he went to work for the organization back in the 70s. Even we were friends, and he called me one day out of the blue and said, I've been. First of all, he said that the president of World Vision is retiring or resigning and going to another role, and World Vision is going to start a search for a new president. And he said, I've been praying about this today, and he said, I don't know how to say this other than to tell you that I heard the Lord's voice saying, it's your friend Rich. He's going to be the next president of World Vision. It's your friend Rich. And my friend Bill said, look, I don't hear God speak like that very often, but he just said, I just had this very clear sense that this was what I heard. And of course I made fun of him. I said, well, it's funny that God hasn't told me that, he's telling you. And I said, Bill, I have no qualifications. I'm not interested. I'm not available. It's an absurd idea. And he said, well, I want you to send your resume in. I said, I'm not going to send my resume in. And so anyways, it became kind of a thing between the two of us. And he got frustrated because he was so certain that, that I should be the candidate. And it was 6 months went by. And then this recruiter called 6 months in and with the same thing. Are you interested in this? And my first question did my friend Bill call you and put you up to, he said he didn't even know, he didn't know who Bill was. He said it has nothing to do with Bill. And, we just found you're one of the World Vision donors, and we're calling some of our donors. So anyways, it was just a series of inexplicable coincidences and fingerprints.
So what does the president of World Vision do?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that World Vision is a global organization with many different tentacles. But so I was president of World Vision USA. There's the president of World Vision International, who is basically outside of London, and Stockley Park is the office. And his name is Andrew Morley. He's a Brit. And so we're kind of a federation of 100 different country offices that all comprise the organization we call the World Vision Partnership. So my chief role was to raise funds in the United States and do advocacy, to be a voice for the work of World Vision, to be a voice for poverty and justice issues in our country. And that entailed speaking to multiple constituencies. So the U.S. government, we receive U.S. government grants, to church leaders and pastors because we're affiliated with a number of churches, and to the broader swath of donors in the United States, child sponsors and people like that. So to be an advocate to carry the message of World Vision wherever I went. And to, as I used to say, to raise $3 million a day, 365 days a year, whether it was easy or not, because we raised about $1.2 billion in the United States in total. So that's a huge fundraising challenge. And then that money goes to support the programs of World Vision in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East. And we have something like 20 offices that fundraise. The UK is certainly one, but some people are surprised to know that Korea is one of our top fundraising offices. Hong Kong is one of our top fundraising offices. Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Finland, Switzerland. We've got offices in all of these countries that do advocacy and raise funds. So it's truly a global effort.
That's a huge amount of money to be needing to raise as well. What did you learn about how you would convince someone, I suppose, particularly individuals, to part with fairly large sums of cash? What did you learn about the best way to really sell your ministry to someone and say, we need your support? What were the sorts of things you said or the sorts of things you did that helped bring in that kind of revenue?
Well, first of all, the number one thing is you have to have work that has integrity and quality to back up your fundraising. It's hard to ask people to give to something that doesn't work or is poorly managed or poorly run. And so the first priority is to make sure that the work was top notch and world class. And, for example, World Vision now is the number one provider of clean water and sanitation, the number one non-governmental provider of clean water and sanitation in the world, bringing clean water to 3.5 million people a year, roughly. And so that requires tremendous technical expertise, hydrogeologists, massive drilling rigs with crews that know how to operate them, water testing facilities. And then you have to do the behavior change part of it, training people to use latrines and training them about hand washing and how to manage a water source and a water point. And so it's tremendously complex. We use solar technology for pumping in many locations. Sometimes we have water systems that serve 100,000 people. So they're not just little borehole wells that you hand pump. Some of them are, but some of them are massive water systems. So you have to really get good at this stuff and know what you're doing. And the same is true for microfinance, where we're giving more than $500 million a year out in small loans, and we have over 1 million microfinance clients around the world. And so the quality of World Vision's work is really the most important priority. But with high net worth donors, you have to kind of involve them. If you want to ask someone for $1 million, you have to. They want to kick the tires. They want to meet the CEO. They want to go and see the work in Africa or Asia, wherever you're doing it. They want to see the people who are doing the work on the ground. And so you have to build trust and credibility with those folks, and you have to give them very detailed reports of what you've done with their money and how you've used it and what outcome you've achieved. So it's like any business has customers, right? And so it's a little funny to call them customers, but they're buying our product, which is, hey, you give us money and we will deliver results that help the poor around the world, and we'll show you those results. And if we do that well, they keep giving.
What changes have you observed in the Christian community, especially in the US, when it comes to just general Christian attitudes towards poverty and even biblical interpretation on some of these things? Have there been shifts in the time, not only that you were president for 20 years of World Vision, but actually in your lifetime? Have you seen a shift amongst the general Christian population in how we think about poverty and the importance of really ministering in those areas?
Yeah, I think one of the mega trends over the last 40 or 50 years in the U.S., and this is kind of a trend that has ebbed and flowed during the entire history of the church. It's this tension between social action and preaching the gospel, right? So you have one school of thought that says, we should not be involved in all this social action stuff. It's a distraction, and we should just preach the gospel. And then you've got another extreme that says, we should deeply get involved in social action, and preaching the gospel is not a priority, but people are hungry, people are thirsty, people are refugees, we need to help them. And these two camps, if you will, are always quarreling about, what does God want from us? What is God's expectation of us? And you could say it's, one group says that the great commandment to love our neighbors is the most important, and the other group says the great commission to make disciples in other nations and all nations is most important. And of course, World Vision would take the approach that, no, it's both. It's both and so there's always been a group of people that say, no, it's really both, and we can't live isolated lives and be blind to the needs of our fellow man. And we have to help the homeless and the poor and the hungry, and we're commanded to do it. And yet we also, want to do it with the gospel on our lips and the truth that we to share the hope that's within us with people. So that's one mega trend. And that, right now, it's kind of, the pendulum is kind of swinging back toward the preach the gospel only in the United States. And, it's no secret to folks in Europe that, President Trump spent 4 or 5 years demonizing people from other countries and demonizing the poor, the immigrants, the refugees, and putting America first, America first, second, and third. So this kind of rhetoric that is constantly being, spoken at the highest levels, I think creates a more difficult environment in the Christian community in the United States for raising funds to actually help these people, right? So it's just you feel like you're advocating with a strong wind in your face, right? That the wind is blowing in the wrong direction. Whereas, in the early 2000s, the wind was blowing in the right direction for organizations like World Vision. President Bush, who was also controversial in many ways, but of all recent presidents, he tripled U.S. foreign assistance to the poor. I mean, he literally tripled, and his AIDS initiative was something that, he's a hero in Africa because of the money he poured into Africa to slow down AIDS and to bring, medicines in and antiretroviral drugs. And so during that 10 years, you had the founding of the Gates Foundation, you had Bono very active on these issues, you had the Clinton Global Initiative. And so there was a tremendous optimism that you had the Millennium Development Goals that the UN put out. So there was tremendous optimism that we could make a huge difference. And a huge difference was made. I mean, all the statistics moved in the right direction in terms of poverty. And then more recently, with a big recession in 2009, global recession, 9 and 10, and then Trump's election, just the wind has blown in a different direction and caused the United States, and not only the United States, but to be more inwardly focused, right? Turning away from the needs of the rest of the world and say, let's take care of ourselves first. So it's been a challenging series of, swings in public opinion and those issues.
It's early days, of course, but are there any signs as to where Joe Biden and his administration may take things on that that pendulum swing, as you describe, of are we being inward looking and caring about ourselves, or are we going to be a bit more globally minded? Are there any signs which direction Joe Biden might go in?
Well, there's no question that President Biden is much more of a globalist, and getting us back into the Paris Climate Accords and trying to restart the Iran nuclear treaty and, reaching out to our allies to say, hey, we are your friends. We do want to cooperate. We value collaboration for the greater good and for peace. So I think there's no question that he ran on that platform, that he would be much more engaging of the rest of the world and doing things together instead of being more isolated. So, yeah, that is definitely his intent as the president. As you know, a lot of these things require the approval of Congress, and that's not so easy. These democracies are messy. The UK democracy is messy as well. And and I think generally much more supportive of foreign assistance issues, much more supportive of, development. We used to talk about the 3 Ds of foreign policy, diplomacy, development, and defense, and so a strong defense, good diplomacy, and development is actually a way of, development meaning, foreign assistance for the poorest countries, helping their economies to stabilize and grow and, create opportunity for their citizens. That's actually a peacekeeping strategy because countries who have growing economies with growing opportunities are much less likely to become unstable and, start conflicts and wars. And so I think the Biden administration believes in that kind of development as a form of diplomacy.
Holier than thou.
Radical.
Delusional.
Ignorant.
Perfect. It's time to challenge stereotypes about Christians, and Premier Christianity is leading the way.
Transform your perceptions. Broaden your horizons. Open your mind to wide-ranging views.
Read interviews with politicians, theologians, and TV presenters.
Discover the breadth of the Christian spectrum.
Be provoked, react, inspired, and informed. Get the print magazine and full online access for just £4.95 a month. Subscribe today at premierchristianity.com.
Premier Christianity Magazine.
The bigger picture.
You've spoken before about how sometimes Christians, I think, can be a bit naive when it comes to poverty. And you've spoken about the need to have good business structures around even churches. If you're fighting in this area against poverty, you need to have good business sense, really. But what would you say to someone who looks at the landscape of Christian charity after Christian charity, raising millions and millions of pounds or dollars, secular charities doing good work as well, and someone sits here and just thinks, well, we're throwing all of this money at this problem of global poverty. Is it actually doing anything? Is it actually getting any better? Because it seems like charities are constantly fundraising. And I think sometimes people get a bit fed up of not hearing any good news. Is there any good news to speak of when it comes to poverty relief?
Absolutely. And, probably the story that remains too untold is the story of progress. And there's a reason for that. First of all, I'll tell you, we've made tremendous progress against poverty. When I joined World Vision in 1998, I think the statistic was that 30,000 children were dying every day of preventable causes, 30,000. Terrible number. Children under the age of 5, and they're dying from waterborne diseases, lack of clean water, poor neonatal care. They're dying in childbirth. They're dying of malaria. They're dying many different causes, pneumonia, respiratory infections, lack of health care, for them. And so 30,000 children were dying every day. Bono used to call this what he called stupid poverty. Stupid poverty is poverty that is needless. These children needlessly die, but for the lack of, a 20-cent medication to help with their diarrhea, that they can be saved, these lives. Well, today, that number is about 15,000 children die every day. So in the last 25 years, it's been cut in half. All the statistics of poverty have been going in the right direction for the last 25 years. Literacy has gone from, adult literacy has gone from something like 43% in the 1970s to 84%, today, in terms of people's ability to read. Education has improved. Access to clean water just since 1990, 2 billion people have gained access to clean water that didn't have it before. So tremendous progress in these statistics. So why is that story not told very often? Well, the problem is the charities want to keep doing the work, so they have to keep raising money. And the tendency is to continue to tell people how bad things are, because the reasoning is that'll get them to give more money if they hear these bad statistics. And if we tell them all the good statistics, they may take their foot off the accelerator and say, well, we don't need to give anymore. I think that's fallacious, because what the donor loves to hear is, that money you've been giving every year for 20 years, it's working. It's making a difference. Keep giving, because we're winning this war. And of course, there have been institutions like the Gates Foundation that have made a huge difference as well. So there's a good story to tell there.
It's interesting. I've heard some people even say that there's been cases where charities have solved problems, but because the charity then exists with employees and, you've got to keep people employed, they've tried to carry on even though the problem's been solved. They don't want to close the charity because you then got employees of people who rely on a paycheck every month.
Well, actually, that's one of my pet peeves, because what I like to say about World Vision is we're one of the few charities that likes to say goodbye. And our whole model is based on helping a community. Let's say it's a rural community in Africa. Our goal is to help that community stand on its own 2 feet and to become self-sufficient. And so we invest a huge amount of effort in training up leadership in that community, forming little committees that define their civil society. So we start savings groups. We start women's health collectives. We start farmers cooperatives. just literally dozens of small committees and groups of people that we organize around problem issues in the community. We create like parent-teacher associations to advocate in their schools, for better education, and then we also bring in some of the things that they don't have the capacity. Like most communities don't have the capacity to develop their own clean water system, and if their government doesn't have the money to do it, World Vision will go in and drill, some boreholes and create some water points, and then we'll form a water committee, and they have to manage those water points. They actually collect money from the users so that they can do repairs when the pump breaks down. And then we stay for typically 12 to 15 years in a community doing all of this work, addressing some of the root causes of their issues and poverty. And then, as I like to say, we hand the keys to them and say, you can drive now. We've taught you what we've helped you solve your own problems. We've taught you some skill sets that you can now use. And we will literally pull out of that community, and we'll have kind of a 2-year exit plan. And we hand over all of the work to the leadership that's been developed in that community. And, this sounds a bit paternalistic, and it's not meant to, because what we're recognizing is the dignity of the poor, that the poor have just as much intelligence as the rich. They just don't have the opportunities or the educational opportunities. And so we try to help them realize their God-given potential, knowing that they have the capacity within their community to address these issues themselves with just a little bit of guidance and help from the outside. And then they enjoy the dignity of being able to support their own community, support their own families. Most people don't like to take charity handouts, right? And, a short phrase I use is, we don't like to give people handouts. We like to give people a hand up. And, but I do think there are many charities, and this troubles me, that they create dependencies, right? Like if you've heard the old thing, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. I've paraphrased that. If you give a man a fish, he'll come back tomorrow for another fish. And if you give him a fish on the second day, on the third day, he'll bring a friend, and you'll give them both free fish. And on the next day, the fishermen will show up at the World Vision office, and they'll say, we stopped fishing because we heard there were free fish available. And so you have to be really careful not to just give things to people without any expectation on their part that they have to earn it or they have to work for it. And so we try to be very careful about that, to let people understand that, hard work produces results. And we have found in general, the poor are among the hardest working people you'll ever meet. I mean, just surviving is hard work for the poor.
How big a problem has COVID been for the developing world? Because right now, at the time of recording, all of our media here in the UK is focused on India and the terrible numbers of deaths. And even the UK government is talking about sending ventilators to India because the problem there is so significant. Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, some people have argued or pointed out that forever how many thousands of people are dying right now in India from COVID, many thousands more will be dying from a result of poverty. And so in context, some people would argue COVID in the developing world is actually not the big issue. It's instead underlying issues that were present long before COVID. Do you have a view on that?
Well, yes. I mean, COVID is a real problem for poor communities and poor countries for a variety of reasons. But, the lockdowns and some of the measures that governments have taken to reduce the spread of COVID are having economic impact. So we see it in our own economies, in Europe and the United States. This has a real economic impact, but it also has a kind of a crushing impact on the poor because many jobs are being lost. People are not able to go to work because their jobs have been eliminated. And if you're living on the margin without savings and without safety nets, it throws people into despair and poverty much more quickly. There's no unemployment check coming from the government or bailout package that's coming to help them. And so on one hand, it's really hurting the poor economically. And we're seeing things like early marriage, which has been kind of a blight in some societies where, 10, 11, 12-year-old girls are being married off to older men. And early marriage has accelerated because of COVID, because as a family feels fewer and fewer resources coming in, the father is more likely to get his daughter married off sooner because there will be a bride price that he'll be paid, maybe three cattle or something like that. And so more girls are being forced into early marriage as one of the symptoms of COVID, what COVID is doing. So I think those issues are real, and they're affecting the poor in dramatic ways. You mentioned India, I think just the other day, 350,000 new cases, a world record. The United States held that record for a while with 310,000 cases one day, I think. But now the US is down to maybe 60,000 cases a day compared to India at 350. And they just don't have the infrastructure. And they have huge population density in the cities of India. It's a 1.3 billion person population. And I think I shudder to think what could happen in the developing world if we don't help them get COVID under control. And so I know our government is talking about maybe shipping vaccines over. We can have a false sense of security. UK is an island, and if you can squash COVID in the UK, maybe you're all going to be safe. But if it's exploding in India or exploding in Africa or Brazil, there is international travel. These variants and mutations will continue to develop, and they will make their way into the United States and the UK and Europe. And it's going to be, we're going to have to see this movie all over again, right? So it's very important that we take a whole world approach to vaccination and containment.
It's interesting you say that. I think there was a bit of a dawning of that very point on us in the UK just a few months ago, where you suddenly started to see people in the media make that exact point of, hang on a minute, if we don't solve COVID for everyone, we haven't solved it at all, because of what you've just said about international travel. And I think there is this understanding now that while from a Christian point of view, we would want to be generous to other countries anyway, even from a purely pragmatic point of view, if you want your society to be open and normal, you need to make sure other societies are as well and have that global perspective. So you do wonder almost in that sense if COVID might help some people to have a more global perspective, even though the reason is perhaps more pragmatic than it is generosity based.
No, I think sadly that's true. I mean, you have to appeal to people's, what's in it for me? You have to appeal to that side of them. And, so, you like to say, well, there's several reasons to do this. One is for our own good and for our own safety. But the other is, just for humanity, right? Because these are human beings too. They have families, they have children. And why wouldn't we want to help our neighbor through a difficult time if we have the ability to do it? So you try to appeal to their better angels and maybe appeal to some of their darker angels as well. But you build the case that, this is good for all of us. And I think that's the case for foreign assistance in general. I mean, I think the United States gives foreign assistance, again, like I said earlier, because this helps with world peace. It helps unstable nations become more stable. It prevents military operations from being necessary. There's a phrase I heard at a conference a couple of years ago that I love, and it goes like this: we're all better off when we're all better off. So it works within a nation. If everybody in the UK society is better off, then everybody that lives in the UK is better off, including the wealthy, right? And so when we can help the majority of people, believe that they have a better life and opportunities, the whole society benefits.
What was the best day of your career at World Vision, and what was the worst day?
Oh, gee, that's an interesting question. There were a lot of best days. When you work for an organization that is literally saving lives and bringing hope to communities and families, there's a lot of things to celebrate. And I can remember many celebrations. I think I traveled 3 million air miles in my 20 years all over the world. And, the day that the well drilling crew strikes water in a community and there's a gusher of clean water coming out of the ground, and the women and girls just break out in tears because their mothers, their grandmothers, their great grandmothers have spent their whole lives walking 7 or 8 kilometers to fetch water and carrying these heavy buckets back on their head. And And now they realize that this water source is going to be just 100 steps from their doorway, and the painful labor is going to come to an end, and the waterborne diseases will come to an end. And so tremendous days like that, just lots of small things to celebrate, on a constant basis. Worst day, I tell the story in my book of my first day at the office at World Vision after I'd come from Lenox, China, the Wedgwood of the US. And here I had been selling fine china to the wealthy for 11 years at that point. And all of a sudden I find myself in my office at World Vision for the very first day. I came in early to kind of pray and kind of get ready to steel myself for what faced me. I felt totally inadequate, totally ill-equipped to do the job. Again, I knew nothing about poverty, and yet I had this large organization of people depending on me. And I remember saying, Lord, I don't know what to do. It took all my courage to show up today. I literally don't know what to do next. And I feel helpless. I feel like I don't have the knowledge or the skill set. And it was almost like the Lord said to me, that's exactly where I want you. I want you helpless and dependent upon me. For most of your career, you have not been helpless and dependent upon me. You've been dependent on yourself and your skill sets and whatever, your education. And it was almost like he was saying, just sit back and watch, be faithful, and see what I do, And over the next 10 years, the revenues at World Vision US tripled. And we were able to help a lot more people. And and I just kind of took it one day at a time and said, all right, Lord, I need a little help here. I'm not sure what to do. I got to make a decision. But it was, that first day was pretty dark, right? And feeling overwhelmed. And, when you have a job that involves kind of saving the lives of children around the world, that's a pretty heavy load to carry by yourself. And I think one reason humanitarian workers burn out too soon is that they carry this terrible weight of responsibility. And I realized that as a Christian, I didn't have to carry this responsibility alone. That, I used to say to my team, God loves these children more than we do. So we just need to do our best and trust God for the outcomes. And, let's not carry this home with us every night that, if we make a mistake, people are going to die. And so just kind of a perspective that you have to have as a humanitarian worker.
Well, that brings us to your new book, which I'd love to talk about. Lead Like It Matters to God. So tell me a bit about how this book came about, because there's a lot of leadership books out there, both in the Christian and the mainstream worlds. There's a lot of leadership books out there. What was it that you wanted to bring to that whole genre, really, of books, distinctively given your experience and your perspective as a Christian? What was it that you were seeking to communicate through this new book?
Prior to this book, I had written 3 other books, and all 3 of those were books about poverty and justice issues. And probably the most notable was a book called The Hole in Our Gospel that was really a call to Christians to respond to poverty and justice issues. In the United States, it was Christian Book of the Year in 2010, and a lot of people bought it and read it. And so for me to write a book on leadership was a very big departure. But, I had just retired from World Vision. My entire career was about 44 years, and I spent about half of it in the secular world, CEO of 2 different American companies, Parker Brothers Games, which is the maker of Monopoly in the US. I think in the UK, it might be Waddington's or something that sells Monopoly, but and then the Lenox, CEO of Lenox. And then the second half of my career, I spent in Christian ministry in a nonprofit environment, global NGO. And so, I felt like, I've had leadership roles in very different, disparate situations. And so I've learned a thing or two along the way about leadership and about specifically Christian leadership. What is the uniqueness of the Christian leader, and how should Christian leaders be different? And so I wanted to write a book about leadership from a Christian point of view. And the subtitle of the book is Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World. So one of my primary observations is that in the United States, and I suspect this is true in the UK, we live in a success-oriented culture. We celebrate the successful, the wealthiest people, the most famous CEOs, the fastest growing companies, the biggest churches, the most famous pastors or celebrities. Even our teams, which soccer team is going to win the World Cup, and we celebrate these sports figures and teams. So we're kind of marinating in success, and this success, this obsession for success, seeps into the church, right? It seeps into Christian ministries, and there's nothing wrong with having successful outcomes as an organization. Certainly, we want successful outcomes, but when we let success become an idol in our lives, it becomes obsessive, right? And we start to want to be successful at all costs. And the genesis of this book was a little story about Mother Teresa, who was once asked by a U.S. senator years ago, Mother Teresa, don't you feel like a failure because you've worked in Calcutta your entire life and poverty is worse today than it was when you began? And Mother Teresa answered with these words. She said, "My dear senator, God did not call me to be successful. He called me to be faithful." And I think with those, 14 words, she turned our leadership paradigms inside out and upside down. That for the Christian leader, success is faithfulness. That God cares more about our character than he does about our accomplishments. And we all sometimes imagine the day we'll stand before the Lord and give an accounting for our lives. And, I say in the introduction of the book, I can't imagine that God is going to be impressed that I was a CEO when I was 33, or that I, had this title on my business card, or I made this amount of money by the time I was 40, or I did this big real estate deal and, it was a huge success. And I don't think any of those things are going to be significant achievements when we stand before the Lord. He's going to say, what was your character like? How did you treat the people in your circle, the people you led? Did you represent me as my ambassador in your workplace with honor and with integrity? And how did you care for your family and your friends and your community and your church? And those are going to be the things that matter in the end. So my book is kind of a call to Christian leaders to don't drink this success Kool-Aid. Work hard, do your best, but realize that your first and foremost job is to be an ambassador for Christ wherever you work. If you work in the government, you're an ambassador for Christ. If you work as an Uber driver, you're an ambassador for Christ.
Absolutely. Well, Richard Stearns, it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to talk to you about all things leadership and your time at World Vision as well. The new book is out now, and you get it wherever books are sold. Of course, Lead Like It Matters to God, Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World. Richard, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to talk.
Thank you, Sam. It was a good conversation.
Thank you so much for downloading the Profile podcast this week. It's been great to have your company. Hope you enjoyed that conversation I had with Richard Stearns from World Vision USA. If you have been enjoying the Profile podcast and all the many hundreds of interviews we've done, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a rating and a review wherever you found this podcast. It helps other people to discover the show and check out the interviews that we're putting out. Want to say a special thank you to Martin in Barnsley, who gave us a review this week and said, "Wonderful interview by Sam with the new Archbishop of York. What a warm and inspirational character. Thank God for calling people like him to the higher offices." Thank you, Martin, for taking the time to give us your feedback. Please join Martin in giving us a rating and a review wherever you found this podcast. We'd so appreciate it. And we'll see you, same time, same place, next week with another great conversation for you coming up. Until then, have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.